Stanford Prison Experiment. Unlocking the Truth is an explosive new docuseries which takes an unprecedented look at one of history's most notorious psychology studies through firsthand accounts of the original guards and prisoners, many of whom were speaking on camera for the very first time. Director and executive producer Juliette Eisner is here to tell us more about it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Okay, how did this project come about?
Yeah, I think Dr. Philip Zimbardo is one of the, most famous psychology professors in, of our time. And that is in large part due to the fact that he created this infamous Stanford Prison Experiment, an experiment that took 24 kids, young men, locked them in the basement of the Stanford psychology department, divided them into prisoners and guards, and essentially had them role play for about a week. And as the story goes, the guards, these people who had been chosen to be guards, suddenly become these kind of evil, mean, abusive prison guards, and these prisoners, become dehumanized, and many of them have mental breakdowns and have to be let out early. What our show really, uncovers is that isn't the whole story. That once you actually start to speak to these people who were involved in this study, that a lot more happened in that hallway than we've been led to believe, that there are different reasons for certain actions. And, as one of the guards says, you may think you know, but you have no idea.
And were people who were involved in this study open to talking, or what was that like?
Surprisingly, on this project, people really did want to talk. And I think that was in large part due to the fact that they really hadn't been given the chance to go into detail about what they had experienced. Some were speaking for the very first time to the media, and others had just been, kind of called, and they gave, a couple minutes worth of interview. We sat them down and talked to them for, 3 to 4 hours each. So we were giving them the stage and really letting them finally kind of own their narrative and really get to say what happened to them, which they hadn't done in decades.
Did those 6 days in the experiment affect these people throughout their lives?
Yeah, I would say there's a spectrum. Some of them are like, oh, this was just something that happened to me when I was 18, like I forgot about it immediately. And others are, have told me that this was one of the most pivotal moments of their entire life, that it's up there with having a kid and getting married, that, this really shaped them as a person. So there's definitely, a diversity of kind of opinions on ways that this thing really affected people. But I think it did leave a lasting impression. And as we can see, we're still talking about this. They're still talking about it. And it still brings up a lot of emotion, a lot of feelings, and a lot of ideas and thoughts. So, yeah.
What was the ultimate goal of the study?
In his telling, he says that he wanted to show that the situation can really essentially affect the way that an individual acts. So even if you're an individual with, a strong moral compass, who has very, strong convictions about what's right or wrong, if you're put into a position or into a power dynamic, you have the capacity to become evil, just like anybody else would. And, Zimbardo would say that his study really proves that he proved his kind of thesis to be correct, that people, when given power over others, use it and abuse it. And, it's funny, I don't necessarily disagree with that thesis. I've worked on far too many shows about fraud and felonies and murder to disagree. I do think power corrupts, but I think that the way that this study was performed is not totally above board, and that there's a lot more underneath this that we need to understand in order to kind of decide for ourselves whether it's legitimate or not. And in fact, this becomes about something even bigger. Once we do listen to these people, it becomes about how a man who is really good at selling a headline can become famous and can really, build a career off of a really headline grabbing story.
Were there other studies like this, or is this one of a kind?
No, I mean, there was another experiment. People might have heard of Milgram, Stanley Milgram's shock experiments, which were conducted a couple years before Zimbardo's experiment. They weren't as flamboyant, I would say, as the Stanford Prison Experiment. That was just, a couple days where one person would, essentially be told to give shocks to another person and see how many that they would give until they would, stop. But what we learned is that actually Zimbardo and Milgram were high school classmates, and they were very competitive with each other, and that Zimbardo was maybe doing his experiment in response to Milgram's, trying to potentially like one-up him in a way.
Thank you so much for being here. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks so much.